Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Trade 2025, Business Strategies for Uncertain Times. We're thrilled to host you here at the Jack Morton Auditorium at the George Washington University for what promises to be a timely, insightful, and highly relevant conversation about the ever-changing global trade landscape. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Anna Helm, and I serve as the faculty director of the Center for International Business Education and Research, GW-CIBER, here at the School of Business at GW. We are especially pleased to present today's panel in collaboration with our longtime partner, the Association of Women in International Trade, WIT, a relationship that has led to many impactful programs over the years. Before we dive in, I'd like to extend a special thank you to two key individuals who helped bring today's event to life, Evelyn Suarez and Aaron Miller. Their dedication, expertise, and ongoing support of GW-CIBER are deeply appreciated. For those of you who may be new to GW-CIBER, we are one of just 16 Centers for International Business Education and Research across the United States, funded by the U.S. Department of Education. Our shared mission is to strengthen the global competitiveness of U.S. businesses. We do this by advancing cutting-edge international business research, delivering innovative learning opportunities for students, and hosting events like this one that engage both the policy and business communities in critical conversations. Together, the National Cyber Network is working to prepare globally minded talent and share knowledge about the complexities of international business. And complexities are certainly abundant right now. As we gather today in March 2025, the international business community is once again facing extraordinary uncertainty. Trade rules are being rewritten in real time, global supply chains remain under pressure, and businesses are having to rethink strategies to stay resilient. Our goal today is to not only analyze these shifting dynamics, but to provide practical insights into how companies across industries are adapting and what strategies will be helpful for them to succeed amid this disruption. We will kick things off with an armchair conversation featuring two distinguished experts, Christine McDaniel at the Mercatus Center and Yuka Hayashi at the Asia Group. Together, they'll help us frame today's discussion by sharing their perspectives on the current trade landscape and what may lie ahead. After that, we're excited to welcome a stellar panel of leaders from 4 industries deeply impacted by trade policy: technology, automotive, fashion, and agriculture. Under the skilled moderation of Evelyn Suarez, our panelists will share real-world insights on how they are navigating today's challenges and finding opportunities in a rapidly evolving environment. Before we get started, I'm pleased to invite Masami Yoshi, president of WIT, to share a few words of welcome as well. But again, everybody, thank you again so much for joining us today, and I hope you will enjoy the program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. As Anne mentioned, my name is Masami Joshi, and I'm the current president of the Association of Women in International Trade, or WIT, as we like to call it. I'm so pleased for this collaboration, not only because this has been, an additional sort of collaboration in the many years that we've been doing this together, but it's especially relevant for me because I'm an alum of GW Law School, and I teach as an adjunct at the law school. So this is especially special for me. As Anne mentioned, we've been doing this for several years, and I think it's particularly relevant now in this sort of environment where there's a lot of uncertainty around the future of global trade. So I'm very pleased that we're organizing a discussion with our thought leaders and experts to see where they think this is going, and practical advice and pointers to how businesses can pivot in this very uncertain landscape. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with WIT, we are a 600-member strong organization. We are nonpartisan. Our members, who are predominantly women, they span sort of all aspects of trade. We have women such as me that are lawyers. We have academicians, lobbyists, economists in-house. They work on the Hill. They work in embassies. We have a number of students, so our programming is really geared towards our entire membership. Our mission is to raise awareness about the importance of international trade to development and to prosperity, as well as to support women in trade. And so we have a mix of educational programming as well as professional development events. So for those of you who are new to it, I encourage you to go to our website, wiit.org, look at our calendar. It's chock-a-block with lots and lots of relevant events that you might be interested in attending, and sign up because the benefits of being a WIT member are many. And for those of you who are students, we have a discounted student rate, which is great. So you can attend our events and partake of the membership benefits. So again, thank you all, and thank you again to Anne and to Evelyn Suarez for her continued leadership with GW-CIBER and for making this happen. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Evelyn Suarez, and I welcome you all here today, and I give, in advance of their presentations, I give our speakers all a very big thank you because it is a very busy day. So we will start with our armchair discussion with Yuka Hayashi and Christine McDaniel, and they will give us an overview of the landscape that we are seeing today and the possible repercussions. Anna very nicely summarized what we'll talk about. So let me just, and I'm not going to read their bios, but I think they're due a proper introduction. Yuka Hayashi is Vice President of the Asia Group, where she focuses on research and analysis in its Japan practice. Until 2024, Yuka was a journalist with the Wall Street Journal for 2 decades, so she was there quite a while, and most recently covering trade policy and international economy from Washington. Previously, she was a correspondent in Tokyo, her hometown, covering Japan's economy, foreign policy, and society. She also worked at Dow Jones and Reuters in New York and Tokyo. So then I would like to introduce Christine. Christine is a senior fellow, a research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Her research focuses on international trade, globalization, and intellectual property rights. Christine has held several positions in the U.S. government, including Deputy Assistant Secretary at Treasury and Senior Trade Economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. And she also worked at virtually all the trade agencies, Commerce, USTR, and USITC. I hope you will welcome Yuka and Christine, and I know that they will have a thoughtful and interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. It cannot be better, couldn't have been better day for this subject. Let me start by asking you all a question. How many of you drive a pickup truck?
A couple.
Okay, does anyone own a Chevy Silverado? I just learned this, but it is one of the best-selling vehicles in the US, and also it is believed to be one of the biggest victims of President Trump's 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which came into effect today. According to the Financial Times, nearly 1 in 3 Silverados built last year, 650,000 of them, were built in Mexico, and another 20% were made in Canada. And even for the ones that were built in the United States, major parts and components like the transmission, the steering wheel, and lighting were made either in Canada or Mexico. And GM executives have said that tens of billions of dollars of the industry's profits could be wiped out because of the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And consumers like us could see the prices of cars and trucks go up. So we have officially entered the era of Trump tariffs, and more are likely to come. Next week, 25% fees on steel and aluminum could come into effect. Then April 2nd is going to be a very, very big day. The president has warned that 25% duties would be could be imposed on all imports from the European Union, and separately 25% on cars, chips, and pharmaceuticals from around the world. And that is also the day when the president's reciprocal tariffs could kick in as the administration completes its ongoing review of existing trade measures under the America First trade policy. So it's quite overwhelming. Christine, you have been watching global trade for many years. What do you make of what's going on?
Well, thank you, Yuka. Thank you, Evelyn and GW and WIT, and thank you all for coming. Are any of my students in the audience here? You can raise your hands. I hope so. Oh, hi, guys. I teach applied econometrics here, so a topic I love, and I love the topic and love teaching. I love the GW students. So, right. So, I think this, in a way, has been a long time coming. We've known just for a long time how President Trump views international trade and how he views tariffs as a tool, one of his preferred tools. And he's long said that the U.S. Doesn't always get a good deal on international trade. So in that way, it's not a surprise. There's a few things going on here, as Yuka's mentioned. So one is the reciprocal tariffs, and that's kind of interesting for those of you know international trade and the global rules. The reciprocal tariffs, reciprocity, is one of the key one of the three legs of the stool, if you will. I mean, for global trade rules that were set up in the mid-90s, which the U.S. really helped to write and was a big proponent of. It includes these three key rules. One is most favored nations. So basically, here's my, everyone brought their best tariff schedules to the table, for in the Uruguay round in the mid-90s, and did some haggling and basically said, okay, this is the best everyone can do. We'll stick to these. We'll charge everybody these tariffs. Nobody gets a better or worse deal than this. And then the other one was national treatment, which basically says we won't treat our domestically produced goods any better or worse than we treat imports. And then the third one was basically saying, we all agree, we can all pursue domestic policy objectives, but we all commit to do it in the least trade restrictive way. So the reciprocal tariff that Trump has been talking about really kicks the leg out of that MFN part of the stool. And so he doesn't really seem to be constrained by WTO rules, but he does have a point. I mean, it is true that other countries, their tariffs are higher than U.S. tariffs. He said very clearly, they charge us, we'll charge them. And if you go back and read the accounts of the Uruguay round talks, there was some. Not everybody was happy about how the U.S. was bringing their tariffs down so much more than a lot of other countries were. But then people are saying, well, in a few years we'll do another round. We'll do other trade deals, and indeed, we did NAFTA, the North America Agreement. We did a number of bilaterals and agreements. So we did get tariffs to come down in other countries, but we never got that other multilateral round, right? Seattle was a bust. Doha never, total failure. And so here we are now, almost 3 years later, and he comes in, he's like, hey, it's not really, why do they charge us, 20, 30%, and we only charge them 2.5%? Or, and you get countries like China, India, and there are tariff spikes in other nations as well that much higher than what we have. So, and in a way, if you sort of ignore the WTO rules, you can kind of see this as a unilateral, forced, multilateral round. If there is a narrow path where this could work out, right? If other countries did agree to bring their rates down to where the U.S. rates are, it could be a win-win, right? It would be a win for the U.S. because our exporters would have better market access. It would also be a win for the other countries, right? And we know that more open countries tend to grow more, and you have higher GDP per capita growth and so on, higher productivity growth. It could also be a total lose-lose because if they don't bring their tariffs down and we do bring our tariffs up, then and then they bring up even more because technically we're going against WTO rules, and then we bring ours up more. Then we get into this global trade war, and that's definitely a lose-lose-lose. And that's, unfortunately, from the news today, that's looks like where we might be heading, but you never know. In fact, by the end of this conference, it could be all sorted out. So, but anyway, that reciprocal tariff thing is a big deal. And like I said, I think there is a narrow pathway there where it could work out pretty well. It's very understandable why President Trump feels this way, but it's not at all clear that other countries are willing to go along with it. And then, of course, with Canada and Mexico, that is from an economic standpoint, huge shooting yourself in the foot. The North American economy is a powerhouse, and the U.S. is right in the center of it. We benefit from it. We contributed to it. But President Trump and his team laser focused on border security and fentanyl, so we're very hopeful that the three countries, along with China, can all come to an agreement on how to secure the U.S. borders and to appease President Trump and his team, while also stopping those fentanyl shipments from China, which Trump and Lutnick have repeatedly said, even just over the past 72 hours, that they are laser focused on. Otherwise, these tariffs will be detrimental to U.S. businesses, like that you're going to hear right after Yuka and I are done. You're going to hear from autos and ag, other sectors. So what else? We have then of course steel and aluminum tariffs. So this is sort of a favored of many administrations. And the last time he did this in 2016-18, there were a number of exemptions. So he did have these big sweeping tariffs on aluminum, steel, but he also had allowed this loophole where you could apply for an exemption, saying, look, if I really have to pay these tariffs, it's going to really hurt my business. So, and they actually approved about half of those tariff exclusion requests on steel and aluminum. It does not look like they're going to do exclusion requests this time. So we could be in for a pretty costly couple of years, and maybe more, but hoping that it will be far less. And if these tariffs do stay on, it will eventually show up in the jobs data, the CPI, the PPI, the PCE numbers, inflation numbers. It will show up on investment, which Yuka is going to talk about, and other things. And then, given that President Trump is focused on the market, perhaps they will take a second look at some of these policies.
President Trump says that a big goal of his tariffs is to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. But whether it will happen depends on the will of the business sector. And right now, the U.S. is not a very competitive place for manufacturing. Why is that? Labor costs are very high. American workers are among the highest paid in the world. Forget low-cost countries like China, India, and others. We make nearly twice as much as the average Japanese worker, and more than 20% more than German workers. Healthcare cost in this country is super high, costing more than double the levels in rich countries in Asia and Europe. And even more important, the US doesn't produce enough workers suitable for jobs at modern manufacturing factories. We may have the world's best PhD programs on computer science and biotechnology, but we don't have many vocational schools or apprenticeship programs that are available to young people in countries like Taiwan and Germany. The US semiconductor sector is seeing a factory construction boom thanks to the CHIPS Act. This week, Taiwan's TSMC said it would invest $100 billion to build additional semiconductor fabs in the US. The Semiconductor Industry Association expects the industry to grow by more than 100,000 jobs by 2030, but they also worry that more than half the jobs will go unfilled because of worker shortage. And that ratio is even higher for technical workers, basically folks without college degrees that work in these modern factories. And this rate is 80%. The industry's research projects a shortage of 1.4 million technical workers in the US. US entire manufacturing sector by 2030. That's a lot of people. These disadvantages will be hard to reverse even with very high tariff levels. Since the first Trump administration, the US has taken various steps to boost domestic manufacturing. The first Trump administration imposed tariffs on China, and the Biden administration plunged into industrial policy, giving out hundreds of billions of dollars in government subsidies to boost manufacturing under the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. Despite these efforts, global companies are not rushing to America's shores. Foreign direct investment has been on a downturn for a decade after peaking in 2015. A decade ago, manufacturing sector represented more than half of these investments. But by 2023, the ratio of manufacturing in FDI has fallen to only 28%. And there is the dispute over Nippon Steel, its bid to acquire US Steel. I'm sure you guys have heard about it. Mired in election year politics, the Biden administration denied the acquisition of US Steel by Japan's top steel maker. And Japan is, as you know, one of America's closest security allies. The decision was based on a recommendation by CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US, which looks at national security risks associated with foreign acquisitions of American companies. In its history, CFIUS has blocked a handful of purchases of American companies by foreigners. Until the Nippon Steel case, all of the cases were linked to risks stemming from China. So the latest decision represented a hugely expansive interpretation of national security, and it has created a lot of uncertainty for future investment in America by allies and friendly countries. President Trump has said that Nippon Steel will be making a major investment in the US, but it won't be buying a majority stake in US Steel. We continue to watch this case very closely, including whether Nippon Steel will be allowed to resubmit its case to CFIUS. Christine, what are your thoughts on FDI and foreign investments in the US?
Yeah, well, look, I'm a big proponent of inward and outward foreign direct investment. During the George W. Bush administration, remember at the very end of the administration, President Bush put out a statement on the importance of openness of the United States economy to international trade and investment. He took that very seriously. His team took that very seriously. And that was one of the it was in our blood, right? Openness. And so this is a very different environment. But at the same time, you have to read the room. The 2008 financial crisis, the U.S. economy, the mood of the country has never really been the same since. Populism kind of took off after that. And then, of course, the severe adjustment costs of this rapid increase of trade with China, which was overall a net positive, but there were some severe adjustment costs in pockets of the U.S. economy. And that is all, come bubbling up, and there's been particular advocacy groups that have really glommed onto that, in not very productive ways, and so here we are. But look, I think I'm a little more bullish on the U.S. economy than I think you are. Just the fundamentals, are all in our favor. Compared to other OECD countries, And as for Nippon Steel, I don't know. I don't think that's over yet. I think let's wait and see. I'm not ready to give up on that yet. But you're right. In terms of inward foreign direct investment, that's hugely important to the U.S. economy. The U.S. employees that work for foreign multinationals in the U.S. tend to make more money than their counterparts that work for purely domestic firms. They tend to have better benefits and better wages, better benefits, and tend to stay in those jobs longer. Just strictly just in terms of the levels of inward foreign direct investment, it is actually, in terms of just the levels and the dollar figures, it is higher now than it has been over the past few decades. It took a dip over COVID, but it came roaring back and actually is pretty much stayed at those much higher levels. Definitely higher today than it was pre-COVID. And then in terms of the manufacturing share of the U.S. employment, look, that's been declining since World War II, and it's pretty much leveled off around 9%. The U.S. is a services economy. We are. No tariff is going to turn that around. I was talking to somebody who is it's a really cool company out in California. They're called Unspun. They're trying to bring textile and apparel manufacturing back to the United States. Guess who they want to hire? Guess who they need hiring? They need engineers. They're building these spinning machines, right? And licensing them out. That's and getting in talks with Walmart and so this is high tech manufacturing. You want to bring manufacturing back? Great. It's high tech. We need more engineers. So I'm a little more bullish on the U.S. economy than you are, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I think we have 30 seconds left, and then we'll take Q&A.
So just very quickly, this morning I checked the website of the Nikkei, which is Japan's largest business daily. The top story was, of course, about the U.S. tariffs on Canada and Mexico. The big headline at the top said, Trump tariffs could trigger shift away from America. Auto sector to face $61 billion cost increase. Countries are scrambling to deal with the Trump tariffs, but they're also beginning to hedge their strategies, beginning to talk with China a little more closely. So it's going to be very important to see where this is going in terms of the U.S.'s relationship with friendly, close trading partners.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, we have some time to open it up to you all, so I'd love to hear from you. And there's no silly question at this point, so ask away. Ed.
Sorry. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Yuka. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. But I've had a question on my mind all day, and this is more of a macroeconomics question. Let's assume that the president implements all the tariffs that he's suggested, whether it's Canada, Mexico, Europe, UK, sectoral, et cetera, et cetera. The conventional thinking is that there's going to be inflation, but if the economy slows enough, wouldn't that mean that the Fed would have an interest on the other side of its mandate to support employment? I mean, how should we be thinking about the relationship between tariffs and interest rates?
You said if he goes through with all of the tariffs?
If he goes through all the tariffs, because I'm thinking it's just going to be a huge drag on the economy. It would cause it to decelerate.
I can take the first shot of that. So if he does go through on all the tariffs, well, look, this is all speculation, okay? So anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen, no. This is all speculation. But what we do know in terms of, economics, suppose these tariffs do go through, remember, a tariff is just a one-time price increase. So technically it's not inflation, okay? It can lead to inflationary pressures, in other words, price increases, but it's technically not inflation. But if the tariffs keep going up and up and up and up, well, then for a while it is inflation. So let's say, prices are rising, and then the Fed, of course, with their dual mandate, like you've said, Ed, they needed price stability and full employment. But if the economy is shrinking, they're going to want to stimulate. They're going to want to lower prices. Lower interest rates. Then high prices, a slowing economy. That is where those are all the ingredients for stagflation, and that is a really bad situation to be in. And if we're in a stagflationary period, because of these tariffs, that is like really shooting yourself in the foot. Talk about like literally, creating your own nightmare. That would probably end up being right around the midterms. So, I don't know. At some point, if we do get into the point of stagflation, we're going to have a lot of unhappy voters. And then at some point, we would hope Congress would take back their mantle of their mandate on tariffs. You'll recall in the Constitution, Congress, right, is responsible for the tariffs, right? They were happy to give that the tariff setting power over to a special trade representative, a few decades ago, because they didn't want everybody knocking on their door, every Tom, Dick, and Harry knocking on their door wanting special tariff concessions. So they gave that over to a special trade representative, which is now known as the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. But the whole idea was always, Congress sets the tariffs, but the special trade representative, acts on behalf of the nation, and then, tells Congress what, they would advise. But now you have a case where, the president has basically taken this over, and Congress is just sitting there, not doing anything. So it will be interesting, it will be really interesting to see, if some of these members of Congress whose constituents are going to get hit pretty hard by these retaliatory tariffs. China just announced 10 to 15% tariffs on some major U.S. agricultural products. What about the states that have automakers in their, in their constituencies? When will these members of Congress stand up? My guess is, maybe once the data starts showing up, and their constituents themselves start speaking up. But time will tell. But otherwise, we could be heading for stagflation, and that would be a very dark time for the U.S. economy. Yuka?
I think Christine did a wonderful job of trying to solve this puzzle.
Anyone else? I hope some of my students ask some questions. Oh, I see somebody. Yeah. Don't worry, we can't see you anyway. We're so blind by these lights.
Hi. Okay. So what would recovery look like after this administration or after the implementation of these tariffs? How do you think that we should go about the recovery from the economic shock?
Do you want to take a shot at that, Yuka?
Sorry, the question was
what would recovery look like after these tariffs go on, and we suffer the consequences?
It's closely related to what you were trying to explain earlier, right? So we don't know whether the economy is going to tank at this point. A lot of people still believe that President Trump is using these tariffs as negotiation tactics, and if that's the case, the U.S. economy is extremely strong, much stronger than anyone else, pretty much, in the world. So we just have to see where this is going. I think it's a little too early to assume that the economy is going to go down from here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, we get into a global trade war, right, where everybody keeps ratcheting up. I mean, that's, kind of what happened, before the Great Depression in the 30s. That would be, that very dire scenario, perhaps leading to a stagflation or even worse, depression. But it's really hard to believe that President Trump would hang in there that long for that. We have seen that he said very clearly what he wants is more cooperation from Mexico and U.S. on the border, more cooperation from China on the fentanyl shipments, and on steel and aluminum tariffs, those look like they're going to be sticking around for a while. But that it's imports overall, like 11% of the U.S. economy or something like this, and trade overall less than 20%. We are not that trade-oriented compared to many other countries. So, and our fundamentals are strong. So, we can take a bit of the hit. It's not going to feel great, but we could take it. And, people will adjust, people will spend a little bit less. They'll spend a little bit less on certain things, spend a little bit less overall, and maybe shift their consumption basket around a little bit. U.S. businesses will find other substitutes, instead of importing those blue widgets from Canada, maybe we can find blue widgets from, Vietnam and, maybe some other countries, around the world or whatever. Those adjustments won't be costless. They will put upward pressure on prices, and companies will take the hit on their margins, maybe hire a little bit less, invest a little bit less. It's really hard to see this ending really disastrously, just given the president's focus on the market and the market performance.
Hello, my name is Jordan. I'm studying International Affairs and Economics. And my question is, how much can we expect other countries to be motivated towards retaliatory tariffs? Is there any non-political reasons why countries might be motivated to implement them? Thank you.
Well, I can take the first shot at that. I think, so that's really interesting. The retaliation, the thing, you really need to, I'm not a political scientist, but you just watch how different countries are reacting to Trump, and it's just amazing. You guys are watching this like I am. How some countries are just all just more than happy to negotiate. Let's keep things out of the press. That tends to go a little bit better for them than how things have turned out for Canada, where, and who was it, their Ottawa leader and Prime Minister, they over the weekend made a big showing about how they were going to retaliate and they'd be happy to do it, how they could switch the power off to a whole bunch of Americans. That kind of poking the bear did not go over so well, and then today, what did we see? More tariff threats on Canada, above and beyond what he's already said he would do. So, you have to realize who you're talking to. President Trump is not President Biden, and President Biden wasn't President Obama, and so on and so forth. So, I just think that there's a certain level of understanding the personalities, of they're not dealing with the U.S. Trade Representative. They're dealing with President Trump. And we've seen how some countries are able to make deals with Washington, and others, are defiant, and that ends up pretty poorly for both sides.
Yeah, I can add to that. Different countries have different tactics, and the EU during the Trump first term stood up and had confrontation with President Trump then. But countries like Japan try to be friendly with the president. This time, Japanese president came to Washington a couple of weeks ago. He really focused on the fact that Japan is the largest foreign direct investor in the U.S. And also, in order to reduce Japan's trade surplus, he came prepared. He offered to buy more natural gas from the U.S., buy more defense equipment. So some countries try to, have deals and succeed, and others just have the tendency to have a strong stance toward Trump.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether the end results are going to be different depending on the outcome, particularly this time. I mean, Trump is threatening to impose tariffs on pretty much everyone. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It's a lot. A lot can still happen between now and midnight. So you never know, and that's not even talking about tomorrow. So, but anyway, this was a really enjoyable armchair discussion. So thank you, Yuka. And I see we're out of time. So with that, let us thank all of you and then welcome the next panel.
Well, hello, everybody. This is very bright up here, so I can't see. I don't think we can see any of you. But anyhow, as you know, today is a really big day for tariffs. And as you heard from our speakers before, the president hit our closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, with a 25% tariff. And I think we forgot about China. They got an extra 10%. So they have the 25%, and then they have an extra 10, and they got another 10. So his legal authority is different than he has used in the past. As in his first term, he used old tools that we'll talk about at Section 232 and Section 301. Instead, he used something called IEPA, which is a law to deal with economic emergencies. And he said the economic emergencies stem from the importation or smuggling of fentanyl and also illegal migrants. So what does Trump want? And what will be the impact of his unusual trade policies on Wall Street and consumers? Our speakers represent a wide range of industries: consumer electronics, fashion, autos, and agriculture. All are impacted one way or the other by tariffs and any retaliation imposed by our trading partners. First, let me briefly introduce our speakers. No time to waste because there's so much to talk about. We will start with them giving a short background about the impact of these trade measures on their specific industry, and then we'll get into a discussion. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes, 10 or 15 minutes left for Q&A from the audience. So first to my left, we have Ed Brzytwa, and Ed is VP for International Trade with the Consumer Technology Association. He leads that organization's trade and supply chain policy and advocacy work. He has a strong focus on improving international trade environment and global supply chains to strengthen the competitiveness of the U.S. consumer technology industry. Prior to his role at CTA, Ed was at the American Chemistry Council. I never took chemistry. I don't know, like I would have. I should never admit that, but somehow I got by. And the Information Technology Industry Council, as well as at USTR as a trade negotiator. Next, we have Julie Hughes. who is president of the U.S. Fashion Industry Association. We know each other for very many years. Like Moshami and myself, she is a former president of WIT. In fact, she's the first president of WIT. Okay. She has spent decades working in textiles and apparel trade. Her association represents brands, retailers, importers, and wholesalers based in the U.S. and doing business globally. U.S. FIA supports fashion made possible by global trade. So I'm going to move on to Rory. Rory Heslington is VP.
Heslington.
I got it wrong. I keep on typing it wrong.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, I renamed you. I'm sorry.
Blame AI.
Just correct it early so we can.
Okay. Well, I'll just refer to you as Rory. Okay. He's VP of Government Affairs with Autos Drive America. Rory spearheads his association's legislative and policy agenda on a range of issues impacting the automotive manufacturing industry. Rory previously served as International Trade Policy Advisor to the Senate Finance Committee under Senator Grassley, where he advised on international trade policy that included USMCA, supply chains, e-commerce, customs, and other things.
Yep.
Pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
You end up covering everything at some point.
And prior to that, he spent 13 years in the private sector. And last but not least, we have Ambassador Darcy Vetter. Needless to say, Ambassador Vetter has had a distinguished career in agriculture in both the public and private sectors. As a global public policy leader working on the intersection of agriculture, sustainability, and international trade, she counsels organizations to navigate an increasingly complex global policy environment. Her distinguished career includes serving as Chief Agricultural Negotiator at USTR, and she was also Deputy Undersecretary at the USDA, where she oversaw the Foreign Agricultural Service. She also was a Senior Vice President at PepsiCo. So I hope you will welcome our guests, and we'll get started. And Ed, tell us about consumer
I'd love
technology.
to tell you about the consumer technology.
Okay.
I'm very passionate about it. So, Consumer Technology Association, we're a 100-year-old association. We had our birthday last year. It was a big celebration all year long. We represent the consumer technology industry, but also we think we represent the entire innovation ecosystem in the United States. So it's not just companies that sell consumer tech to you. It's companies that are using technology to advance their businesses. So obviously we have some very important brand names in our membership, like Apple or Samsung or Microsoft or Google. The list goes on. But we also have John Deere in our membership. We have other types of big tech-enabled companies in the automotive sector. So, we are more known for our trade show, which is the CES, which happens every year in Las Vegas in January. It's like literally right after New Year's, and this is where the companies come and demonstrate all of their latest and newest innovations and technologies and launch their next product cycle. So I was just there in Las Vegas in January, and literally that was the calm before the storm, because little did we know we would be getting hit with tariffs of this magnitude on this particular day in March. One other fun fact about CTA is that we have 1,200 member companies. 80% of them are small businesses. And I'll tell you firsthand, those are the companies that are getting hit the hardest. It's the companies that were founded to engage in international trade and to supply innovative new technologies to American households. And they're really struggling with this, and they're going to struggle even more as these tariffs come on. So I want to talk to you in specific in my opening remarks about our tariff impact report, which we first issued in October, pre-election, and then we reissued in January this year at CES. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So this study we did with the Trade Partnership Worldwide, which is a well-respected trade consultancy here in Washington, D.C. And the first scenario we looked at was, well, if the president imposes a 10% universal baseline tariff and a 60% flat tariff on all imports from China, what would the impact look like? I mean, look, we had to model something during, the campaign season, because this is what the president was talking about: a 10% universal baseline tariff, 60% flat tariff on imports from China. That's what he started with. Eventually, the president started talking about 20% universal baseline tariff and 100% tariff on all imports from China. You might know this, that there's legislation in the Congress that proposes exactly that, to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations status and impose a 100% tariff on all imports of strategic products from China. The list in that bill contains many, many consumer technology products. So we went with this 1070 scenario and 2120 scenario because we thought it was going to be additive: 10% universal, then 60% on top of that. 20 plus 100 equals 120. And so what the study shows is that there's going to be significant declines in consumption because of the increased costs of these products due to tariffs. And you can see on the left side of the slide here, those are some drastic numbers, particularly for laptops and tablets. The reason why is that for laptops and tablets, gaming consoles, monitors, and smartphones, those products were never hit by the Section 301 tariffs on imports from China. They were List 4B, and those are highly price-sensitive products. Can you imagine that if you had to pay $300 more for a smartphone, would you actually do it? Probably not. People will hold on to their devices for longer, and so this is why we see the decline in consumption. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we looked at what is that overall impact on consumer purchasing power. At the low end, 90 billion. At the high end, with the 2120 scenario, $143 billion reduction in consumer purchasing power for consumer technology products. That is a massive hit. It's really hard to model right now every single tariff that's being proposed because a lot of it's very vague. This is the route we chose because we thought this is going to be the most expansive approach that the president could take. We might have understated it based on everything that we're hearing coming out of the White House and how severe things are going to be. And I don't know where this is all going to go, but this is just could be an example of the reduction in consumer purchasing power. So the next slide, let's finish there. One more slide, please. There we go. This is the simple equation. Consumers buy fewer devices. Consumers pay more for the devices they do purchase, and consumers have less money for goods like groceries and rent. So affordability is going to deteriorate for products as tariffs come on. I'll pass it on to Julie.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, so thanks. It's great to join you, and thanks to everyone at GW for hosting us today, and thanks for WIT for organizing this. So I have just a couple of slides. I'm taking a different approach than Ed, just to share, what's a perspective from the fashion industry. And so kind of our mantra is fashion made possible by global trade. Fashion doesn't exist without having global inputs, whether it's designers in Italy using US cotton, making product in Japan that then is sold in Vietnam. All over the world, we're bringing together different aspects for fashion. So let's go to the next slide, because this is really the most important slide as we talk today about what we see from the fashion industry about, so where are all the jobs and what is the value chain and why do we focus so much on the global aspect here? And so we really kind of have it divided between, what happens before manufacturing. Much of that happens in developed world countries and here in the US for US brands, or for Europe for European brands. And then we have creation, product development, all of those jobs that are so important and are a large part of the value of each piece of apparel that you wear. Then we have the production, and that's what people normally think about, right? For apparel is, so where is it made? Most apparel is not made in the United States anymore. If we talk about the imports, it's, depending on who you talk to, ITC or CRS, 90, 95, 98% of the apparel is made outside the United States. And that's mainly because it's still very labor intensive. There have been a lot of efforts try to use robots and try to make it a little bit less labor intensive and more likely to do that here in the US, but we're not there yet. So that production is all over the world, and more than 100 countries. I think in the last data, it was about 190 countries ship some apparel products to the United States. Now, most of the apparel comes from China, but it's not just China where we're getting our apparel, and we'll be talking about that more later, about what are some of the impacts of the tariffs announced or that went into effect at midnight last night. But then we don't just stop with the production. There's logistics, there is warehousing, and then there is, of course, transportation, and then retail. So all of the jobs that are in the retail stores that are selling apparel, and all are dependent on this value chain working. If we try, this is the concern, of course, for the tariffs, if we try to cut it off, or we're saying the production part that happens offshore, we're definitely going to increase that 20% today from China, 25% from Mexico and from Canada, both of whom sell apparel to the US, by the way, although it's not as big as important as autos or agriculture. So what's going to happen to that? And that starts to break up the supply chain, and then we go to the jobs issue. So let's go to just the last slide here as kind of the intro. Because we pay a lot of duties, and what a lot of folks don't realize is how high the duties are on apparel products in particular. So tariffs can go as high as 32% on apparel. And I know a lot of the talk about tariffs is, oh, US tariffs are very low. You know, the average is 2%, 4% on manufactured products. That's not true for textiles and apparel. We have this slide. I mean, so the duties collected, I think, is pretty relevant of 13 billion. But what I think isn't on this slide that I want to mention is it's not just the tariffs that are on products that are imported today. It's also the 301 tariffs. Ed mentioned, taking a look at that most of the consumer electronics were on list 4B. And the same is true for a lot of the apparel and our consumer products were on list 4B, but not all. So the 301 tariffs from the first Trump administration, and sadly kept in place by the Biden administration, we paid $220 billion in tariffs since the imposition of those tariffs. So the tariff issue and seeing what that potential impact will be is going to be tremendous on fashion and on the clothes that you wear. And I'll stop there.
Well, thanks, Julie. So I'm Rory Heslington with Autos Drive America. So Autos Drive America is a newer trade association. We actually just had our 5-year anniversary, so we're much younger than the CTA. But Autos Drive America represents the German, Japanese, and Korean automakers' U.S. operations. Most people don't know that those companies produce just about half of all the vehicles produced in the United States. So it's about 4.9 million vehicles last year. So the average supply chain for a car includes about 30,000 parts, thousands of suppliers. The average vehicle crosses either the Mexican or Canadian border about 7 to 8 times. So you times that by 30,000 parts. Those tariffs add up very quickly. Our initial analysis of current status quo with just 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, you're looking at about a $3,000 to $5,000 price increase per vehicle. Worst case scenario, about $12,000 price increase per vehicle, if you include steel and aluminum and other tariffs go into effect. An automobile is the second largest single purchase most Americans make. It's very price sensitive. Dealerships will tell you they lose deals on cars over $10 a month all the time. People walk out, over $10 a month on payment every day. And so if you're looking at $3,000 to $12,000, that's a major price increase on an American's monthly car payment. We're already seeing the highest transaction price for vehicles in the history of the U.S. I think the average transaction price right now is about $47,000, $48,000 for a new car. And this will just exacerbate that problem. I mean, that's just the reality of how this is going to go. And the automakers themselves may have some room to absorb some of these costs for a little while, but the question is for how long. And breaking news, I guess Lutnick just said on Fox News that tariffs will be lifted tomorrow. So
Really?
we'll see. I don't know. Who knows? It's so fluctual. But I just got an alert. He says tariffs may be lifted tomorrow.
Let's keep our fingers crossed.
So just, breaking news here. I don't know where I was, but the
Lutnick.
Yeah.
Tariffs might be gone tomorrow. We can end the panel now.
Yeah.
No. No, it's just, but oh, that's right. The automakers themselves may be able to absorb the costs, but the suppliers won't. We just went through USMCA renegotiations 6 years ago. The automotive industry is very capital intensive, long timelines to plan new models, to move supply chains, to test parts for safety and environmental regulations. My companies especially are just starting to meet the new USMCA rules of origin requirements of 75% North American content, and to shift the goalposts again so suddenly is very difficult for the industry to manage. And so it's just, you take that up and down the supply chain, it makes it very difficult to manage this. And I'll stop there because we have a lot more to talk about.
Okay, Darcy, your turn.
Okay. Well, we are, I think, very blessed to live in a country that has a wide variety of climates and soil types and all sorts of things, which means that we grow a very wide variety of agricultural products. And so, in discussing the panel, it was tell us what is your typical supply chain. I'm not sure there is one when you think of U.S. agriculture and how broad the range of products really are. I think it's also important to remember that when we talk about agricultural trade, I think people's memories go to the trade war with China, what seems like a long time ago, but wasn't all that long ago now, where we talked a lot about soybeans and corn and wheat and rice and commodities. But we also export a wide variety of more specialty products, which compete in different ways and with different countries. So you have your global commodities where we have many other countries who compete with us and would be happy to take our place if we were facing tariffs externally. We use the fact that we are efficient producers of commodities to become very efficient producers of meat, which we send to a single animal might go to many different countries. And if any part of that animal is, and we ship them to the country where they get the highest value. We don't need a lot of, chicken feet in this country, but China loves them. And they are really important to the value added to processors and suppliers of poultry, for example. And so any of disruption in those markets where we send those individual cuts can have a real impact on what the farmer receives and what the processors do. And we can't really talk about trade in the ag sector without talking about processing. If you think about, trade and manufacturing and wanting to bring manufacturing back to the United States, the largest manufacturing sector in the United States is food processing. And the thing that's different about that ag and food sector is that we are export dependent, not import sensitive. And so the thing that really stands out for me in this America First trade policy and most of the discussions we're having about trade and the imbalances we need to correct is there's almost always an assumption that we're protecting ourselves from imports. But in US agriculture, where 1 of every 3 acres that we plant is exported, either directly or on the hoof through meat or processed into products, we're looking to be as competitive as possible with others who are shipping products externally, not necessarily protecting ourselves from imports. And we have import-sensitive products too, but really as a whole, we need access to those foreign markets and access on competitive terms. So when you think about the tariffs that have been proposed, you think about steel and aluminum, the cans we put our beverages and our foods in, the parts to make the John Deere tractor that's so critical to farmers, tariffs on Canada and Mexico. In agriculture, we too send products back and forth across the border. We may send grains to Mexico to raise feeder cattle that then are shipped to US farms to be grown out into the beef that we produce. We do the same with pigs in Canada. So our products also cross the border back and forth a few times. If you think about gasoline prices in the Midwest, farmers are gearing up to plant. That means a lot of hours on the tractor, and a lot of those tractors will be in the Midwestern United States, which pull that oil from Canada. So there are lots of higher costs of imports that we're looking at, all of which make those exports then less competitive. And then, of course, we look at how our trading partners respond if those tariffs come to play, and that often is in retaliation. And if you want to make retaliation hurt, you apply that retaliation on sectors that are export dependent, and that has often, of course, been agriculture. So you cost more to begin with, you're less competitive, and then sometimes hit with those tariffs. We saw China announce today 15% on poultry, cotton, corn, rice, 10% on the rest of agricultural products. Canada's retaliation list includes a number of agricultural products as well. We'll see what Mexico does and whether those tariffs are in place tomorrow. The last point I would make is just that we seem to kind of wipe our brow a little and say, well, maybe we're just threatening those tariffs, and so it doesn't matter. But the threat of tariffs is also really costly. If you think about the millions and millions of dollars we've just heard of now for the contingency planning in case those tariffs come into play and stay into play, that's real costs for US businesses. And every time we suggest that maybe we're not so reliable, we encourage our customers to maybe hedge just a little. Maybe we'll buy 5% of our soybeans this year from Brazil. That is market share we are likely not to get back, particularly in a commodity type of environment. Once we encourage our customers to figure out how to deal with our competitors, they may continue to deal with our competitors even when those tariffs go away.
Okay, well, I guess we'll jump right in to tariffs. And we obviously have experience from Trump's first term, but his tariffs were a little different then. They were generally directed to China with the 301 tariffs and also the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, because he was dealing with an overcapacity of the allegedly dealing with Chinese flooding the market, the global market with steel and aluminum. So we have experience with that, but now fast forward to today, we have a lot. He's proposing his trade policy and his proposal for tariffs are much more wide-ranging. How did you adapt then, and how do you think you can adapt today to mitigate the harm from these tariffs? Do you have to volunteer?
I mean, I'm happy to start just because you're right. So from the first term, what were most brands and retailers looking for? All right, we got the message. Don't source as much in China. And while China was the largest supplier of textiles and apparel to the US market, and it still is, China has lost a lot of market share. And so for most companies, part of their strategy was sourcing diversification. So let's look for where else could we go to have similar product. It takes time. It's not just working with the factory to make sure that you have the quality, but we also have social compliance issues that we need to make sure, particularly in textile and apparel factories, that the worker conditions are appropriate and the factory conditions are appropriate. So a lot of time and money was invested in that. And of course, what many people found and was suggested by Trump administration and Biden administration is look at Western Hemisphere, look at our free trade agreement partners. Those are the safe havens for you. Those are the places where you should do your production. And that's why to see Canada and Mexico first on the list, and of course the little spat, a day and a half with Colombia. I mean, the brief spat with Colombia, who we also have a free trade agreement with. I mean, so kind of the messaging, I think, for a lot of the apparel companies is, what message are they trying to send us? We heard you when you said diversify from China, but what is the message today, which seems to be only come back to the U.S. And if I can just, we can talk more about this maybe later, but that's not realistic for apparel if we're importing 95% of it to come back to the U.S. and find workers in the U.S. That's not going to happen. So what is then the recommendation for the industry and for ours? I think it's not clear what that message is.
I think for our industry, similar story. The way we adapted as an industry to the Section 301 tariffs was, let's pivot, let's find new sourcing partners in other markets. We did a study on this in 2022, which clearly showed for the Section 301 covered products, you saw shifts away from China to countries like Mexico, to Vietnam, to other parts of Southeast Asia, even to more developed countries. So what's happening today is definitely China related, in my view, in part. Still, only because there's not just a concern about production in China, there's a concern now about production by Chinese companies or production with Chinese content in third countries, and how do we adjust for that? And I think some of the conversations behind the scenes with our trading partners might be, well, what are you going to do to help us address this China problem? And I think as we move towards a review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, that's certainly going to be part of the conversation. So for now, what our members are worried about is, well, if we can't source from places like Mexico or Vietnam or elsewhere, where can we do it to sell an affordable product to the American consumer? Because if the price goes up too high, the cost is too much, you will not be able to have that market here in the United States. And I think my biggest worry is that because of all these tariffs, we become so non-competitive from a cost standpoint that production, ironically, moves offshore.
Yeah, it's the same for the auto industry. I mean, as far as China goes, most of the components that were coming for the automotive industry were lower cost components, and much of that has moved to Mexico for the most part. USMCA compliance is something the auto industry needs to think about in order to have tariff-free movement across Canadian and Mexican borders. I think the bigger impact for the auto industry was the 232s on steel and aluminum. Cars are obviously made from steel and aluminum. There's a lot of specialty steel that goes into vehicle manufacturing that just isn't done in the U.S. Some is done in Mexico. A lot is done in Canada, especially on the aluminum side because Canada has such cheap energy. So once that got resolved the first term, that was, that alleviated some of the concerns. There's still some specialty steel that's difficult to get, that's still more expensive. And on top of all that, U.S. industry raised their prices in line with the tariffs. So it didn't provide any, just made everything more expensive here too.
So when we look at the first time around, again, it was the retaliatory tariffs that really had the biggest impact on U.S. agriculture. Some inputs, of course, also we raised those prices. And you saw, U.S. soybeans, U.S. exports selling at a discount. China deepened its ties with Brazil. Brazil planted more acres and converted more land, cerrado and rainforest, to planting. That land is still in cultivation, so we are still competing with a larger base of production. How did we deal with it? The U.S. taxpayer bailed out U.S. farmers. We spent $26 billion making U.S. farmers whole with money from the Commodity Credit Corporation. It is not clear that that is available this time around, that would be able to be used. And if you think about the broad range of tariffs, part of the reason the tools that USDA had to apply to the problem were based on programs and access to those farmers because it was largely commodity exporters. If we look at prolonged tariffs with Canada and Mexico, we're talking about a lot of horticulture products and companies that would be hurt. We export to Canada a lot of high-value processed products, like the sheer range and the depth of the products that would be covered. What tools would we use, and what would the price tag be? Taking a bailout approach to make farmers or food producers whole, I just don't see as being realistic.
So how do you think farmers or the industry feel a second time around? Do they expect to be bailed out, or are they unhappy with Trump because many of those states went for Trump?
I think right now the expectation that is being placed is that, in fact, there would be a similar program to what there was in the last administration. Certainly, in her confirmation hearing, Secretary Rollins said if we face the same challenges, we would look at using similar tools. Again, with some of our row crop producers, maybe it's possible to do some of that on retaliatory tariffs, but if you look at the breadth of what we are exporting and what might be affected with Canada and Mexico, for example, it's not clear that would be an option, and that USDA might have the tools to do that with spirits or wine or other products that would be impacted with retaliation.
I have one more question for you. With having been at USDA, and farmers in your industry rely, I guess, on services from USDA. How do they feel about the cuts that are being implemented government-wide?
I think there's still the impact and who was affected is still sort of shaking out and becoming known. But I think that there's concern in recent reports that county offices and state offices, leases were not being renewed, so that face-to-face interaction between farmers and their USDA representatives to be able to sign up for conservation and production programs and things. I think there's concern that it may reach that level. I know that some of the economists, the forecasting that USDA does is not only critically important to farmers as they make their planting decisions and look at markets, but the rest of the world uses USDA forecasts and analysis to make their own decisions as well. And so as we look at some of those capabilities, I think it will take a while to see how that has been affected and how positions may move around. Of course, we lost a number of people from the Forest Service and other parts of USDA that people don't always think about as being USDA as well. But I think the effects are still being determined.
Let's pivot to USMCA. Ed, you mentioned that there is a concern that China is using Mexico as a platform. And so the question is, how do you all see this affecting the review? I mean, we're not supposed to be renegotiating this agreement, but we're supposed to be reviewing it. It's supposed to take place in 2026, but it looks like it's going to happen sooner rather than later. So I'm interested in all of your views on how it will affect this review of USMCA. Maybe we'll start with Rory?
Sure.
Since autos is so enmeshed regional.
I think China will play a big role in the review. Well, I'm not going to call it a review anymore because I'm pretty sure it's going to be a renegotiation.
Still review.
We'll keep it a review. I mean, USTR has more or less hinted that they are looking very closely at China restrictions, and especially for autos, whether that's, Chinese content doesn't qualify for USMCA rules of origin, or you can't have any Chinese content for a qualifying vehicle. I don't know, but it's certainly going to play a big role. And I think and depending on how they structure it, there are Chinese-owned companies in Mexico that have been there for a couple decades. They're just doing business. They're not trying to flood the market or enter through the back door. So there's just questions on how you structure that is going to make the review difficult, I think.
You have something to say.
Well, yeah, you have to keep in mind that companies went to Mexico because of the signal that the U.S. government and the political world sent to them to get out of China.
Yeah. Right, nearshoring.
If the goal was move your supply chains out of China, and we got a lot of that rhetoric in 2018, 2019, 2020, then going to Mexico seemed like that was the right thing to do. And now, if companies go to Mexico, they might be penalized for doing that.
Right.
And that, to us, is not fair. There are good actors that took that signal and said, we're going to get out of China and we're going to source from Mexico, and we want to do the right thing. But I would say it's not exclusively Chinese companies, obviously. There are companies that were non-Chinese that had operations in China that decided to move to Mexico, and these could be from the United States. They could be from a variety of trading partners. So the conventional wisdom that this is just about Chinese PRC companies moving to Mexico and doing greenfield investments is not accurate relative to the facts.
I had a question from a client. They heard a rumor that that the U.S. would force Mexico to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, similar type of tariffs on Chinese goods. Have you heard something like that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, right. Well, thank you, because they heard it first.
We validated it.
I would say, in an answer to this question, I do hope it is a review, and I do hope that the three countries remember what Christine said at the beginning of this, which is that the North American market is a global powerhouse, and that there is strength in numbers. And if you think about what we did in USMCA from an agriculture perspective, not very much when it came to tariffs, but we did modernize that agreement when it came to really reinforcing science-based decision-making, making sure that the animal and plant health, which only gets harder to protect, and human health with climate change and other threats. The three North American countries can work together and set an example that we'd like to see other countries follow with China or with many other countries where we have questions about their rulemaking and the strength of the global market. So, we have something really valuable in those three countries working together. And I think it's a missed opportunity if in this review, we each go back to the list of minor grievances we have with Canada and with Mexico, and we focus on those trees instead of really re-emphasizing the value of the forest that is USMCA and the things that we could do with it, including pushing back on unfair trade practices from other countries. Now, the right way to do that and the limits of that are things we would need to work out. But if this is a review, I hope there's an opportunity to think about what is the asset we've created, how do we use it, and how do we use it in a way that can strengthen all three economies.
Yeah, fully agree. For the auto industry, the only way the U.S. auto industry is competitive globally is if the USMCA creates a strong integrated North American market to compete. The USMCA is just, with the negotiation of NAFTA to USMCA, the automotive industry was kind of the center of the changes to the agreement. And we're feeling that pressure from this administration already, which is probably weighing on my pessimism for how this is going to go. But I agree with the sentiment. I hope it is just a review. I hope the recognition is that we just continue forward and let the pretty nascent changes that just are starting to kind of bring fruition, come to fruition, take hold from the first negotiation.
Sure, of
One
course.
more point on this. There's a new coalition that CTA just joined. As a matter of fact, the U.S. launch of this coalition is tomorrow. It's called the Coalition for North American Trade.
Yeah.
And this is a tri-national coalition comprised of associations, business groups, companies from all three partners in North America. And this is about North American trade.
Right.
As the agreement is part of that story, but we are all working on this together.
Yeah.
And we have joint approaches, and I'm looking forward to see how that coalition develops and influences the debate.
But that's part of the problem, I think, with what happened today. And in a sense, it could be, unfortunately, that even if the tariffs are lifted tonight, let's say that happens when Trump talks to Congress tonight, but there's a bad taste for our colleagues in Canada and Mexico that isn't going to go away anytime soon. And I think it's going to raise itself in the review, and if this administration sees it as a review, or is it more of a renegotiation? And that is a real concern.
There are so many questions that I want to ask you.
Sorry, just one last point. The biggest question I get from my member companies is, when do I have to pay the tariffs and how much is it going to be? And so they are just, what's happening is they're just setting money aside to pay tariffs that is not flowing into investments.
Right,
It's not flowing into hiring people. It's just sitting there waiting to pay a tariff bill. And that uncertainty is impactful, today.
Opportunity costs.
Yeah.
I do, talking about bad taste in one's mouth, and let's go to Europe. Things it seemed to be pretty not very good. I mean, on Ukraine, but also on trade when Trump says he's going to impose tariffs any day. And obviously Europe that transatlantic relationship is very important. How do you see that? I mean, we don't know. He hasn't imposed tariffs. What do you think might happen, and how would it affect you? How?
Yeah, I think we have to take the president at his word, and when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. Now, the details are always a little squishy. Like today, I mean, if they one day of tariffs, maybe not. But I do think you do have to take him at his word. There's still significant imports from Europe.
Back and forth.
Back and forth.
And exports. I mean, when you talk about global brands, autos, apparel.
Yes.
BMW, for example, their largest plant in the world is in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And they export, hundreds of thousands of vehicles all over the world, a lot of that going to Europe.
I thought you were right. Did they go to China too?
Not so much after the first term. They still do some, but it's decreased due to retaliation and just kind of reshifting supply chains.
I have an oddball. You go ahead, and then we'll have an
the only
oddball.
thing I'll add here is that in the bigger picture, Europe and the United States should be allies and friends and working on the same challenges together.
Correct.
And when the U.S. government intervenes in that relationship and imposes measures like tariffs or other types of trade restrictions, it makes it much more difficult for us to cooperate. And I mean, I do feel like if we're overly aggressive here, it's possible that the Europeans look for other partners in the world to accomplish the things they want to accomplish.
Okay, since we have 2 minutes left, I wanted to ask you, what do you think will satisfy Trump? And number two, there's an investigation. There's an investigation on shipbuilding, and they're proposing these fees that are enormous on ships that have Chinese-built ships in their fleet. That's something that it's probably above the radar for many people. So you can answer either one.
Do you want me to start?
Either one. Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Look, this is a legacy Section 301 investigation from the Biden administration that this administration is carrying forward, and they are accepting comments on these proposed actions to address China's quest for dominance in the maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding industries. And comments are due the 24th of March, and the hearing is the same day. And these fees are far more drastic than I think any of us in the industry anticipated. And we're talking about at least $1 million per PRC-built ship every time it enters a U.S. port. And if that ship has multiple stops across, the United States in the ports, like East Coast ports, for example, then the $1 million fee has to be paid every single time. And so our read is that these costs will be passed on through the supply chain and ultimately to the consumer, which actually increases inflation. There's an export element to this as well, that over the course of time, U.S. exports have to use U.S. flagged ships to access other markets, and that percentage increases by certain, dates and times.
Right. And it doesn't exist.
Yeah, there's no.
The capacity doesn't exist.
Right, there is no capacity.
There's a tiny U.S. flag industry, I know.
So my joke is that USTR did not get the memo about reducing the trade deficit.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I would go to the other question that I think is on everyone's mind, which is, what does Trump really want? And that no one knows, because I don't think what he wants has anything to do with the trade policy as we normally think about it. Look at using IEEPA as the measure, and to say we're using tariffs now on fentanyl and migration as opposed to trade issues. And I think that's the big question, is what does Trump really want, and who in his administration actually speaks for him? If we looked at the Sunday talk shows for what Lutnick and Besant said, I mean, they were all over the place, and they were wrong, at least as of midnight today. We'll see if they're right tomorrow.
Yeah, all those competing reasons for, and competing ways to use tariffs, right? Which one is the prevailing motive? And I think it's pretty hard to tell on some of these functions. Is it income? Is it leverage? Is it fairness? Which ones of these will prevail? But it's a big stick, right, with real economic consequences. And so I'm sure it is tempting to wield it when you want action, right? But at the end of the day, what you really want from it, I think, has been hard for people to figure out, which is,
What about the Truth Social post from yesterday about tariffs on the ag sector?
So I can't
In
remember
the end of
what
it, he said, "Have fun."
Oh, yeah.
Have fun producing for the U.S. or something.
That we would, produce for the U.S. We do that, and then some. So, we would all be eating a lot of Wheaties.
A theory. Maybe he wants to break the global trading system because he doesn't like it. And that, forget the WTO, we'll make our own rules, and we'll do what's best for America. Isn't that what he's saying?
Well, I think he's already just willfully breaking them.
Yeah, right. Now he's breaking the system.
I think reciprocal tariffs will be a key piece of that. I still don't know what that means. There is no methodology. It's unclear how that would be calculated. I mean, in a sector like agriculture, where you see in some cases, very high tariffs, other types of tools, quotas to limit trade, and heavily subsidized products, how would we compute that, and how would other countries compute that on our exports in return?
He sort of had a window into his thinking today where, in response to the Canadian retaliatory tariffs, the president said, well, because of our new reciprocal tariff policy, we're going to impose reciprocal tariffs in response to Canada's retaliatory tariffs, which isn't really reciprocity.
Right.
It's counter retaliation, but
escalation.
Those are nuances.
Yeah,
And he also,
that's the deflation. That's where we get to deflation.
And he also did say, if you want to avoid tariffs, make it in the United States. And
right.
I mean, that is happening. I mean, it's been, my companies alone have invested $40 billion over the last 2 years into the United States. I think it's like, I don't have the number in front of me, and I'm going to make this up, but it's several billion more if you look at the whole auto industry. So
Can I use my show and tell?
Okay,
I think that's part of it.
To that point, I brought a prop, and thank you to the Cato Institute who made this T-shirt kind of showing.
You should read it. I don't know.
How to make one T-shirt. You probably can't read it. So that it says, this shirt traveled from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., to Seoul, to Tennessee, to Miami, to Guatemala, to San Francisco, to Illinois, to Ottawa, to me. And I think it kind of reflects what really happens in global trade, which isn't understood by this administration yet.
Okay, now we should allow our audience to
Yes.
ask some questions. And I can't see you, but please come to the mic and introduce yourself and ask a question.
We know they'll put a spotlight on the mic.
I know.
Yay.
Oh, there we can see you.
Hello, I'm an undergraduate student. My name is Jordan, and I'm studying economics and international affairs. And my question for you is, how will these tariffs, or how might tariffs possibly affect your industry's work or relations with developing countries? Thank you.
Really?
I mean, yes. I mean that is a huge concern. The textile and apparel industry has created jobs and development in countries around the world, whether from Africa to Southeast Asia, where the living wage is substantially higher, and it is a big concern as we move toward reciprocal tariffs. What is that going to mean? And all we have heard definitely in the last few years, concerns from our trading partners that companies are, holding back when they're placing their orders, and they need to place them later because of the economic uncertainties, and that has even more of an impact today. So certainly for apparel and for textiles, there's potentially a big impact. Not to mention the fact that we are not sure that the Trump administration will support an extension of AGOA, the duty-free benefits for Africa, or duty-free benefits for Haiti, and we may actually be pulling out from those areas. So yeah, it is a major concern for us.
How about food aid?
So, well, again, maybe not the product of these tariffs, but certainly to changes in policy. So I think if you think about tariffs raising the cost of food, the biggest impact that an increased cost in food has is on the poor, whether that is in the United States, where it becomes a very regressive tax, or if it is the cost at which we're able to export commodities overseas. So whether that's, milk powder or, products that we send to countries with lower incomes, or whether that's our highest value, steaks that we might be sending to Japan, right? We would be less competitive, but that also means that consumers there are paying more. So from the commercial sense. Of course, we have also seen the cancellation or the reduction of many of our food aid programs. Some of them have been reinstated, but again, continued problems with the shipping, the warehousing, the storage, the delivery, all of those pieces perhaps have not been put back together. And I would also say, Ed made a comment about the smallest companies being the ones that are most affected. In trying to play triage when global commodities start going in different flows in different places because of different prices and tariff advantages, it is smaller countries or people ordering in smaller quantities that have the more difficult time making those logistics and prices work. It's also US farmers who are smaller and don't have on-farm storage, so they have to sell when they harvest. They can't wait until some of these price, fluctuations or volatility might change and they can get a better price. And so, we do see when it comes to, global flows in food, it is those who have the least cushion who can insulate themselves, from the effect, whether that's on the producer or the consumer side.
Yeah, I think your question is a really important one, especially in the context of Evelyn's comment that this is about breaking the multilateral trading system. If we exist in a world where the biggest countries just use their power to impose their will on the smaller countries, all that's going to lead to is more barriers to trade and more tariffs, more non-tariff measures. And from a technology industry standpoint, what our goal is to ensure that the people of this world can have access to technology products that can change their lives at the most affordable prices, and that households across the world can use those every single day. And if the costs go up to a great extent, then that accessibility decreases over time, and there becomes a greater digital divide, and that's long been an issue for the developing world, is bridging that digital divide. I don't want to exacerbate that.
Okay, anybody else out there? If you have a question, come on up, because we can't see you.
While she's coming up, I think it is worth mentioning that almost all the trade flowing back and forth is flowing according to those rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that countries in general are adhering to their tariff schedules, and people feel comfortable taking the risk of exporting because they know what's going to happen when their product lands. And so, what we're seeing here is very disruptive and raising questions about the adherence to that system. But we do take for granted that, most of our trade will flow according to those rules, and most countries continue to honor them. And of course, we want that to continue to be the case.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Celine. I'm from the European Union. We've heard a lot of elements today on the impact of these tariffs on consumption, purchasing power. My initial question was, how would you advise small and medium businesses to react? But actually, most of you more or less replied to this already. It's very difficult. My question would be more, we spoke about some countries retaliating, others negotiating, but wouldn't one of the solutions, when you negotiate an FTA, which is something where I have an experience, there are two objectives. One is to create opportunities for businesses. The other one is to put in place stable rules. And this is very important because this literally allows businesses to look medium and long term, to project themselves and to predict and to find new businesses. What we see happening now in the US, with the impact it has on neighbors now, but on Europe soon, and is a complete unstable context for businesses. I'm wondering whether, in parallel to, of course, retaliating, adaptation, reaction, shouldn't we work also on rules? Try to put back the rules. I don't know, you talk about renegotiating or reviewing the agreement with Mexico and Canada. Shouldn't we use this opportunity to reinforce the dispute settlement mechanism of this agreement? Shouldn't we, or big associations like you, push authorities to also use, I'm not saying they should not retaliate, but in parallel, some do that. I think the Chinese are starting to go to WTO. It's a broken system for the moment, it's not really working, but they reinforce and push authorities, countries to also look for legal avenues, not only to react and adapt, but also maybe to reinforce the rules and allow long-term, medium-term businesses to continue doing their businesses.
You're right.
No, yeah, right.
We agree with you.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's look, for small and medium-sized enterprises, they do rely on that stability. They do rely on clear rules in order to trade. I think the problem we face right now is that tariffs, maybe other trade measures, are being used to address non-trade issues, and small and medium-sized enterprises, and I'll include startups in this, are becoming acceptable collateral damage, politically speaking anyway. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of empathy for their situation at the moment. Maybe that changes as the impacts become more tangible and severe, but at the moment, we do have a responsibility as associations to advocate for the multilateral trading system and stronger rules and effective ways to resolve disputes that don't include these types of enforcement measures. And I firmly believe that's what we're going to advocate for throughout this administration, just on principle.
And I think what's made this, so first of all, yes, right? That's why you spend so much time negotiating those dispute settlement mechanisms, is to make sure that people go to them and use them. And the theory was, when you have a trade dispute, you can deal with it in a particular trade context and not have it infect the rest of your foreign policy or other parts of your relationship. And I think we're seeing the opposite now. But part of what I think makes this so challenging is the specific authorities that are being cited to take these actions, because there's always been that exception that if it's national security, if there's really an emergency, well, then we know that that takes precedence over a particular trade rule at a particular time. And that's really the authorities that are being cited here, that there is an emergency and it's an emergency effort. Well, how long does an emergency go on? Right. What really qualifies as an emergency? We haven't really tested that, and we don't see, frankly, those who are supposed to be providing oversight pushing back on the use of that authority yet. So I think we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions about how those different systems overlap and whether we need more definition.
Or asking whether that authority actually allows, if the Congress even envisioned the use of tariffs under that authority in the first place.
Right.
But also, look at the signals. We're early in the Trump administration, but if you look at the trade agenda that they put out yesterday, their section about the WTO is pretty scary, because it certainly sends the signal that they're not committed to the WTO in the way that we all might have thought when we first joined and negotiated the World Trade Organization. When they said they're, quote, losing patience with the WTO, I think that's a real concern, that we have rules that we've negotiated that were to the United States and EU's benefits as the developed world, and I'm not sure that this administration intends to support that.
Isn't a problem with a path back to the WTO and this national security argument is the position the U.S. has taken that its determination of national security is self-judging.
Right.
And so, there's just no accountability. No. So you can always invoke a pretext, and what we're seeing is pretexts that are far-fetched. For example, fentanyl from Canada. So you can, and Trump has there was something on NPR about bully lies. So he could just use a bully lie and impose, IEPA. And there's no recourse at the WTO, according to the United States, because our determination is self-judging.
But I think that goes back, Evelyn, to this underlying set of trust, right? That people who opted in to the WTO who became members would trust that those emergency measures would be used when there's a true emergency.
In good faith.
In good faith.
Right.
And also that, thinking from a national security perspective, you may want that to be a self-judging test if it's a time of war when someone would try to block you from using it.
Right.
We're in another conflict with, right? So there are limits and challenges to the way that international governance works. But you have to be committed to that overall experiment of the global trading system, right, to make sure that that due restraint is there. And I think we're testing where that commitment, is right now. I'm an eternal optimist, and wanted to share a little bit of a thought from a panel I listened in on a week or so ago. And I think if we wiped clean, or the WTO is not perfect. It needs reform, and I think the rules that we've all focused on are not necessarily responsive to the biggest challenges that we face. Right. Where are we on trade and the environment, and thinking about tools to manage trade and carbon and the climate challenges we face? The WTO should be helping us do that, and it should have a climate of trust where we could think about tools to do it. That's maybe not where we are, but some of these challenges may bring us to the point where we say, wait a second, what do we actually want this institution to do? And Hamid Mamdouh said on this panel, I wish we would stop talking about the future of the WTO, and we would start talking about the WTO of the future. And in the same way that I hope we can use that NAFTA review to start talking about the value of what we have and what more we want, how do we start that same conversation when we think about the multilateral context?
And having lived through WTO negotiations,
well, yes.
Yeah, we both did. I have some sympathy for this perspective that the WTO, the negotiating function of the WTO, is inoperable, and by and large, that is the function of some limited number of WTO members holding up progress on the interest and willingness of other WTO members to negotiate agreements, and we have very clear examples of that progress being held up in the e-commerce negotiations, or investment, or other types of negotiations, fishery subsidies. It's there's a long list of negotiations where we could come together and have results, but that progress, because they're plurilateral negotiations, it's being blocked.
Well, I think we had 34 seconds, and I think I'd like to end it on a positive note, because Darcy gave us a little hope. And so I want to thank all of you for taking your time. I know you're all very busy, and it's very busy times for you. And I want to thank the audience.
Thank you.